And in the morning, you see like black and white cockatoos just like being really loud, and they're just flying back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm there like eating breakfast. I'm like,
It's nuts.
I was like, because my wife like loves birds.
Yeah.
And I was like, I go, you guys have a lot of cockatoos. He's like, they're fucking pests, mate. He's like, we shoot them. I was like, what do you mean? So I didn't know they eat all the macadamia nuts at the macadamia nut farms. So they're considered pests, like they really shoot them.
Yeah.
And I told him, I was like, dude, you know a cockatoo here in Miami costs $5,800? And Glenn was like, he was like in shock. He was like,
He's like, we're now selling cockatoos. Dobinsons steel colored cockatoos.
Yeah. I'm David Otero. I'm the owner of Dobinsons USA, partners with Glenn and Keith Dobinson. I'm running Dobinsons USA for them, so we can go ahead and cover all of USA, Caribbean, and Canada to distribute Dobinson products. So people always ask me, how did you get started into this? And it's funny because my dad went to Australia. That was always on his bucket list. He went on a trip to Australia for about a month, came back, told me he had a great time, but didn't give me too much details. Unfortunately, he passed away, and 3 months later, I get a phone call from Glenn Dobinson looking for my dad. I had to ask him, what did you and my father talk about? He basically laid down, the ideas they had about being a distributor for Dobinsons in the US. So I obviously wanted, to go ahead and fulfill that role and fulfill, the plans that my dad had with Glenn. I never understood why Glenn trusted me at that time. I was so young. I mean, we're talking about 2010. I was 23 years old. I was so young, and I never understood why Glenn Dobinson entrusted me so much. I understood that he has 3 boys that work at the factory. They're all within my range, year range. So I understood like how he still saw how a 23-year-old can still work very hard and give all his focus and attention, because his boys have done it in the family business. So Glenn flies over, we laid down the plan, we laid down the ins and outs, and I became a distributor for the US. So now having the distributorship to the US, I just started importing product and I started selling it. The reason why my dad looked for Dobinson is because they are a coil spring manufacturer. When my dad pretty much brought me into, apart from the 4x4 market, the truck market and all this stuff, being Colombian, we knew that we had connections in Colombia and in Venezuela with armoring companies that armor vehicles, bulletproof them, and they add a lot of weight to these vehicles. These vehicles that have added so much weight, they tend to lose height and they need a stronger suspension. Since that was our forte and the connection with Dobinsons in Australia, we were able to fulfill these contracts and supply these fleet of vehicles with the suspension that they needed. We did that from 2010 to around 2014. And in 2014, we went ahead and had a booth at SEMA. I invited Glenn over, he flew in, and we had a booth at SEMA and we wanted to show a little bit about the product. Glenn was amazed of how big the 4x4 market was in the US, but we were never tapping into it. We just kept fulfilling contracts with armoring companies because it was pretty easy to do, especially with the connection we had in Australia being the manufacturer. But Glenn's biggest question during that trip was, why are we not selling to the 4x4 market? So obviously I told Glenn that that's a big hurdle. I mean, you got companies that are very big and a very big market like the US. It requires a lot of capital and it requires a big infrastructure to be able to, fulfill that. After that SEMA trip that we did, I basically laid down, the plans that I feel like would be good for Dobinsons to attack the 4x4 market. Obviously, requires a lot of capital, and not everything can happen really quickly, all at once. So we started off with Panama. I moved to Panama for a year, and after living there for a year, we were able to build the hub that we wanted, that hub to service Latin America. We were able to build it, train all the guys, and get that on its feet to make sure that that hub basically services Central and South America. Now that I have that hub servicing, basically the old clients that I had, all the markets that I was basically, fulfilling with, these armored vehicles and bulletproof vehicles, I was able to come back to the US in 2017 and go ahead and open up a hub for the US so that we can tap into the 4x4 market. So now that we came back to the US, We wanted to make sure that it would be in a prime location. We felt like Miami was perfect for that. Perfect to service the Caribbean as being one of the best places to export from into the Caribbean, and also being in the US where we can send everything by ground to distribute all the US and even Canada. Being in Miami also gives us a really big advantage as far as importing containers. Port of Miami or even Port of Everglades allows us to get the containers quickly and swiftly from our suppliers. So now fast forward into 2017, one of the hardest challenges was to get the right inventory for our market, right? Australians love their Toyotas. So we felt that the Toyota was a very strong brand that we can keep in stock and sell really well. Toyota is what we focused on. The first 3 vehicles that we bought was a Toyota 4Runner, a Toyota Tacoma, and we bought a Jeep Wrangler because we wanted to focus on US spec vehicles that they didn't have a suspension for or accessories for. So now having those vehicles, I was able to go ahead and focus on them and making the products that the US, Dobinsons US needed to carry and sell into that market. So by owning these vehicles like the Tacoma, the 4Runner, and the Jeep Wrangler, when we first opened Dobinsons USA, it allowed us to take the measurements and to develop the suspension for those 3 platforms. We did really well, especially on the Tacoma and the 4Runner. We really dialed in even the suspension for the Wrangler as well, but the Toyota, like I said, it's our forte. It's what the Aussies really push. It's what we've done really well with. And even here in the US, this Toyota has a really strong following. We were able to tap into that market. But having, those 2 vehicles, the Tacoma and 4Runner, I can tell you I really enjoyed driving them, especially developing the suspension that I had a lot of say into it. It's crazy. Everybody always asks us, like, what goes into developing the suspension? So normally what I tend to do is I send them all the OEM parts so they can check the OEM spring rates, can put the shock on the dyno, check the valve forces, and then they have a form of a lot of measurements that I have to take. It's way too many measurements, but to make sure that we get this right. After I send them all those measurements, I send them the OEM parts. They go ahead and produce some sample parts. Those samples get air freighted to me. I put them on the vehicle and I test them out. I have to report any type of feedback that I can give them, from ride quality, from the lift amount, anything that I can give them. Sometimes we have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again, or just make minor adjustments. With being Dobinsons USA, we tend to make sure that we imported every product that's in their catalog. An Australian company, they like their overlanding and their camping. So besides our, what we manufacture, which is suspension, that's what we hyper focus on. We wanted to make sure we had our awnings, our drawers, our fridges, our snorkels, everything else that's, in their range. But being so focused on suspension, we knew that that was what we had more control of as far as development goes. And, we had to make quick changes or whatnot. Stocking so much product definitely, gave us that challenge of having some product that didn't move as quickly as we wanted to. And then we had some other products that moved too quickly. One of the challenges that we feel is that the product being made overseas and have to be imported, it takes a really long time for us to get it. So we have to make sure that everything that's ordered, we order the right quantities, and that we order, at least 6 to 12 months worth of stock. So I want to say that's one of the biggest challenges we feel. But it definitely has taught me a lot throughout the years. I always want to make sure that I get it right, especially when we have new products, like let's say a new suspension for the RAV4. We want to make sure that we bring in enough quantities to sell. Sometimes I underestimate and we outsell what we ended up bringing in. And sometimes I can overestimate and we have too much product on the shelf. But that's something I've learned along the years. I've learned what, we need to focus, carrying more stock, and some that we can carry a little bit less. So obviously keeping the whole range in stock does tie up a lot of capital. But the coolest thing is that our engineers back home in Australia, they do a great job, especially when it comes to the suspension. The suspension is such a good product. We don't see too many warranties. So even though we have to tie up a lot of capital in keeping stock, we know that a lot of the stock doesn't have to get taken off the shelf to fulfill a warranty. So that allows us to not worry about that. And that has really helped me in running Dobinsons USA. As I look back, I really do wish I would have opened a West Coast warehouse. I feel like that's one of the biggest things I regret not doing. Having 2 locations, one to service the East Coast, one to service the West Coast, would have been prime. It would have been so ideal. Even though we have such great clients on the West Coast of the US, it does take a little bit longer to get the product to them. And I felt like if I was gonna start this company again, I would have preferred 2 locations in the US. So now we fast forward to 2023, even going now to 2024. We've carried more stock because of the spike in demand from 2020, 2021. But now that it's kind of leveling out or becoming back to normal, it's creating us to have too much inventory. And I'm sure any other manufacturer, any other company like ours is facing the same thing. But the cool thing about our product, it's not a perishable good. It's gonna stay on the shelf. It might have some dust on it. We'll dust it off before we ship it to you. But we know that, it's still in stock, and that's what we care about. We wanna make sure that we have stuff in stock. I actually get more mad about not having it in stock than something that, it takes a little bit of time to get it, out the door. Another thing that the pandemic revealed to us was keeping stock was so important. We noticed that like in 2021, like I won't mention any other competitors' names, but these companies that make the product themselves, they had long lead times. Since we had it in stock and we started stocking more and more, since we had it in the shelf, we were able to get the product into the client's hands before some other brands that make the product. So we saw that in 2021, some other companies had 24, 26-month lead time. We had it in stock and we were just flying by, selling the product, quickly shipping it out because we had it in stock. So we knew that keeping a good amount of stock was key, especially in this market during the pandemic for sure. So I would say that's one of the biggest differentiators from us and the other companies. But another thing that makes us different from the other suspension companies is the options we offer. I mean, being a coil spring manufacturer, we offer not only 3 colors of coils that some clients actually like, but also so many different spring rates, so many different lengths, so that we can, make sure that you get the proper coil versus just preloading to make it right, like some other competitors do. Being in 2023, now looking into the future, there's a couple things that excite me. I definitely want to go back to that, what I mentioned earlier, that I really regret that I never did. I want to open up a West Coast warehouse. I really want to have some stock in a warehouse and an office that represents Dobinsons on the west side. Another thing that I would love to is expand. We continue to outgrow our current location always. I want to continue expanding here, our Miami location. And another thing I wish that I can wave my wand and just make things happen. I want to start manufacturing some certain items here in the US. Manufacturing certain things here and there here, by us would allow us to control a little bit more of the flow as far as keeping certain, stock flowing, So, like making it overseas, we have to carry a large amount of stock, but there's certain things that I wish that I can actually make here so I can keep that flowing a little bit easier. We're always developing new product, and we're always trying to, every day trying to, add more to our range. We got the RAV4 coming, we got the Subaru stuff coming, we got Sprinter coming, we got the new Grand Cherokee. We're just constantly always working. I mean, those are the ones that I just named that are pretty close to arrive, but it's just constantly working on new products. So I'm excited about those as well. So now that you've learned more about me and my business, I really want to send a special thank you to the clients that have entrusted us in purchasing our products. Throughout these years, I've been humbled by the loyalty that we've seen from our clients. We go to Overland Expos, we talk to consumers directly, and I feel like 99% of every client that passes by is a client that is already running our product. That really blows my mind. So Dobinsons Nation, we thank you.